Good evening and welcome to the Culture Debate. We're live here in the Linbury Studio Theatre at the Royal Opera House in London with representatives from the Conservatives, Labour, Liberal Democrats, UKIP and the Green Party debate what they would do for culture and the creative industries if you vote them into power at the general election. Now, we're at the theatre set of Opera North's family opera Swan Hunter with an invited audience from across the creative sector. Everything from British fashion, architecture, film and TV, theatre, publishing and music. It's all part of the creative industries, the fastest growing sector of the UK economy in 2013, contributing £77 billion.
It is time for the United Kingdom's creative community to take control of its own destiny.
Politicians find it easy to talk about the creative industries when they're abroad, but less so when they're back at home. They and we need to be bolder about the massive contributions that arts and creativity make to British life.
Great opportunities and projects start to develop when public and private industry starts to work together. We're all part of the same great endeavour.
We really need more artists, painters and musicians to make the world more beautiful and to create happiness.
The great strength of the creative industries in this country is that for a while now they've been drawn from the widest possible demographic. At the moment we teach rich talented students and poor talented students. But if access to the arts continues to get more expensive, soon we'll be teaching rich talented students and rich untalented students.
I think the danger is that when you receive cuts in the arts, what you lose is the chance to create the artists of the future, that in turn will feed the creative industries.
Well, let me introduce our panel of politicians tonight. They were promising backstage it's going to be a bloodbath, but I really doubt that that's going to happen this evening. First of all, Peter Whittle, writer, broadcaster, founder of the New Culture Forum and UKIP's culture spokesperson. Baroness Bonham-Carter, co-chair of the Liberal Democrat Parliamentary Party Committee on Culture, Media and Sport. Harriet Harman, Labour Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. And Ed Vaizey, Conservative Minister of State for Culture and the Digital Economy. And finally, completing the quintet, Martin Dobson, the Green Party culture spokesman and candidate for the Liverpool Riverside seat. Give a warm welcome to our guests this evening. Now, of course, we're going to be taking questions from you in the audience, but we'd also like you at home to contribute, and you can do this on Twitter if you use the hashtag #CultureDebate. We're going to start the evening, as is traditional these occasions, by giving each party representative a chance to set out their views. What would their approach be to culture and the creative industries if their party forms the next government after the general election. Now, I don't have any brutal klaxons as they had in the leadership debates to keep time, so I'll be coughing very politely when they overrun their time, which I hope they won't do. But we're going to start, we thought the fairest way was to do it with the party who has the largest number of seats currently in Westminster, and that's the Conservatives. So I'm going to invite Ed Vaizey to speak first.
Well, thanks very much, Martha. And I'm very sorry this debate is happening at the same time as your great programme, Great Irish Journeys, which goes out at 8 o'clock this evening. But I'll be recording it tonight. Thank you to the Royal Opera House for hosting us and for making us all feel like wonderful divas as we sat in the green room with our stage directions being boomed over the microphone. And thank you to the Creative Industries Federation, which I think is hosting probably the first arts debate to happen during a general election, which is fantastic news. And thank you to everyone in the audience who does so much for the arts and creative industries. I've been the Arts Minister for 5 years. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been a wonderful privilege to work with people like you over such a long period of time. There's no getting away from the fact that when we came into office, we had to make cuts, but they were balanced by the significant increase in lottery funding that has gone into the arts. So if this is going to become a debate about funding, the overall funding that's gone to the arts in the last 5 years is broadly similar to that which went to the arts in the 5 years before. But what I think I'm most proud of is that we didn't lose our ambition. We didn't simply look at how we could get through these tough times. We were also progressive. So we looked at measures to increase and support philanthropy, which is a key element to arts funding as well. We ring-fenced funding for music education and extended pilot schemes like In Harmony to integrate them into music education as well. And also, across the piece, the Chancellor has been very ambitious with his tax credit policy, not only the unequivocal success of the film tax credit, which has brought so much investment into the UK and supported the UK film industry, but also tax breaks for high-end television drama. You'll have seen the Prime Minister at Game of Thrones yesterday, now a keystone of the Northern Ireland economy, as well as for animation, for visual effects, and now for the theatre, for children's television, and for orchestras. So we've tried to support the arts and creative industries in different ways as well. Alongside the creative... and that's it.
Very good, very obedient. They're not like this normally on the radio programmes. Thank you very much, Ed.
I thought I was on just a minute for a minute.
No deviation or hesitation. Let's hear the Labour standpoint now from Harriet Harman.
Thanks very much. Well, if I was an opera singer, I would be just standing here and somebody would be singing from the wings, because I'm afraid I've got a very poorly voice, but I'm hoping I won't suffer as Natalie Bennett did with a brain freeze as well, but it certainly feels like that right now. But I'd like to add to Ed's thanks to the Opera House and the Creative Industries Federation for hosting this discussion, and it's great for all of you to be here. Obviously, we are going to have an absolute hell of a dust-up heading up to the general election, because it is a very big choice and we'll all be competing for everybody's votes. But I think there are some things that I don't think there's any point in having a disagreement for the sake of it, and I think there's some things that we're all agreed on. And certainly, I would say about Ed, or about Jane. I mean, I don't know, just don't know you guys so well, but, I wouldn't question their commitment to the arts and to culture and the creative industries at all. I know they're absolutely, every bit as passionately committed to it as I am. But I think that there is a difference in approach, and I think it goes around three things. That's what it feels to me about, which underpins our approach to arts, culture and the creative industry where it comes to the question of our public policy approach. The first is, one of the reasons why those of us who are in the Labour Party are in the Labour Party is because we absolutely believe in equality of opportunity. We really believe everybody should have a chance. Every child should have the same opportunity, and that goes for arts and culture as well. And that's why we're going to be putting in our manifesto that we want there to be a universal entitlement to a creative education for every child. That any child that is in a school that doesn't have music, dance, drama, art, design, and loses out on discovering their potential, that is something which we think is completely wrong. So that's one of our approaches, that it shouldn't depend on where you live. You happen to be some outlying place in a region far away from London. that shouldn't limit your ability to be included in the arts, and that's why we want to see a real rebalancing and regenerating of arts and culture and the creative industries outside London. Oh my God, can I just give my 2 final points? Okay, secondly, we are...
Honestly,
sorry, my brain is
frozen.
Cheating? Okay, secondly, I think...
One last point.
Okay, is that we're not afraid of public policy, government and subsidy. We think it can do very good things. Okay. And thirdly, we're internationalists, so we're in favour of the EU and abroad.
That's very interesting. Well, we'll be picking up on many of those points a little bit later on, but I like the idea of being in favour of abroad. I wonder who isn't in favour of abroad, for holidays anyway.
Ask Peter.
We'll in a moment. Before we open it up to the other parties, I just want to remind you that you can contribute to the debate on Twitter, #CultureDebate. We've had some tweets already coming in, and people have been asking questions in particular, I suppose, in the cut and thrust of an election campaign. And Vaizey, we had one from Janet Morris. Will politicians be brave and commit concretely to creative industries, even if it's not an obvious vote winner?
Well, yes. I mean, I think we are committed. I mean, I think one of the things I've seen over the last 8 years that I've had this portfolio, both in opposition and in government, is I think the creative industries have taken their place really at the heart of the debate. And I think, you know, we debate the intrinsic value of the arts as against the economic value, and that tends to get people's hackles rising. But nobody doubts the importance of the creative industries to our economy. And also, talking about abroad, I heart abroad as well, is what I've seen from the great campaign that we've had since the Olympics, is the creative industries are our calling card abroad. If you go to any street in any country in the world, they will probably talk about our creative industries, our artists and musicians and so on, before they'll talk about almost anything else. So certainly I would see them as central to any political debate.
But how much opportunity do the arts and creative industries in general get discussed during a general election? We've got another Twitter comment from John Calvert. He said, the arts really isn't something political candidates are regularly discussing on their constituents' doorsteps. Bigger things going on, exclamation mark. And that must be true of your constituency, isn't it?
Mine? Well, I think actually there is a big commitment in my constituency to the arts, partly because of the jobs that people want in the creative industries. And I think they do want a government that backs all the opportunities that they might get in music, in film, in theatre and culture more generally. So I think that if you call it creative industries and culture, people don't think it's a vote winner. But if it's like, do you think it would be important for you that your children get a great cultural education and access to the arts and music and dance and drama, then that is a vote winner, and it is popular on the doorstep.
OK, well, let's open it up to the other parties now. I'm going to ask Jane Bonham-Carter.
Well, I'm absolutely terrified by this sometimes, so I'm not going to say thanks to anybody. I'm going to say...
Just before we start, do you love abroad?
Well, I'm coming to abroad very, very specifically, and can I just say creative is... I mean, consensus is breaking out all over here, I'm afraid, not bloodbaths. But going to the abroad, actually, I wanted to bring up, having had a long introduction, which is gone, that in the times we live in, I actually think that culture and the arts and creativity are even more important. And I just want to quote someone, which was Edward Said, who was an absolutely great Palestinian intellectual, who said, rather than the manufactured clash of civilizations, we need to concentrate on the slow working together of cultures that overlap, borrow from each other and live together. And I think that is something that is so important at the moment, considering what's going on in the world outside, and that is something that... and I don't actually dislike the term creative industries, because although, unlike Harriet and Ed, I've not actually sat at the centre of government, I think creative industries has made those who are in the Treasury understand the importance of the arts and culture. And I don't know, Ed, but I think a lot of the tax breaks, which of course started with Labour, have been as a result, tax credits I think they're meant to call them, have been as a result of the Treasury understanding that our creativity is something that is incredibly valuable, not just emotionally, but actually economically too. And I do want to thank John Sorrell, actually, Sir John Sorrell, for this organisation and debate. And he and I both have gone to Mexico with the Great Week.
Okay.
And there, all I can say is they think we are preeminent in the creative industries, and I think that's something that we should not throw away. We should encourage. Okay?
Lovely. Well, a great dollop of consensus there. Yeah. Not something that UKIP is normally known for, but Peter Whittle, let's hear your pitch tonight.
Martha, I don't want to let you down. There's going to be some carrying on of the consensus. We in UKIP believe the arts obviously are vital. I personally worked in the arts most of my adult life, in TV and then in journalism. But they are really what we are. There is such a thing as society, and the arts are an integral part of that, without question. We also believe that it will always have to be publicly funded. But it should be probably, what we should aim for is more of a mixed funding. We have that at the moment in Britain, but what we also have is the most extraordinary level of very rich individuals. I think that Boris Johnson was at one point boasting about our 72 billionaires in London. What we would like to do, and it will take obviously a long-term thing, I admit that, is to create in Britain a much stronger culture of giving, a culture of philanthropy, to match the public spending on the arts. That is a long-term aim because you have to change people's attitudes to giving. And there have been certain attempts at that in the past, but they've always been slightly half-hearted. In terms of the broader thing about people working in the arts, access to the arts, interest in the arts, exposure to the arts, I would say that, in fact, education at primary level is key.
Okay.
It is absolutely key.
I'm going to stop you there, because actually these are subjects we are going to be coming on to, but thank you very much for setting out your views so clearly. And finally, waiting very patiently there, Martin Dobson from the Green Party.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be here, and welcome to everybody. The Green Party sees arts and culture as essential for the future development of the human race, and essential to the way we're going to develop and be able to live on this planet altogether. So we see creative work in schools as not being something separate to other subjects, but as the way that other subjects are taught and expressed. So we want to get people, young people, thinking creatively all the way through learning maths and physics and chemistry and all the other subjects, so that people feel confident as adults in being able to express themselves creatively and move forward in that way. I, like the other panellists, heart abroad, but I don't want to work in competition with abroad.
What are you talking about? We're the
hang on,
You're reaching into my time here. Sorry. We want to work cooperatively with other countries because we are in it all together in the world at the moment with the problems that the whole world faces. The Green Party sees arts as something that should be more participatory rather than something to be consumed. So we're focusing on drawing people and giving them the skills and helping them to get involved in creation and doing things rather than something that people go and just watch. Is that fine?
Very good. And they interrupted you as well, 2 times. You did excellently. And one tweet following all of that, Rebecca Ellaby saying, so much consensus going on, it's agonising. Well, I think once we get into some of the meat of the discussion, I imagine it's not going to be quite so consensual. We should say, in case you're wondering, that we did invite both the SNP and Plaid Cymru to take part in the debate, but they decided that they didn't want to. So let's go to our first question from the audience. And if I could make a plea for questions rather than speeches, because that's where we can get through lots more different topics. And I'd like to call upon Sam West, please, who's chairperson of the National Campaign for the Arts, but of course we know you as an actor and director as well. So off you go.
Thank you. You'll have seen from our latest issue of the Arts Index that despite a welcome increase in lottery funding, overall, funding for the arts in England has fallen further and faster than ever before. Treasury funding, for instance, is down by 1/3 since 2007. Other countries see investment in the arts as a way to aid recovery. Germany and Sweden have both increased their arts budgets 7 years running. My question is twofold. Do you agree that every pound invested wisely in the arts delivers not only an economic return for the nation, but a cultural and a social one as well? And if you do, what are you going to do to reverse the damaging current trend of reductions in Treasury and local government investment in the arts? In other words, for all the talk, why does arts policy seem to amount to, we love you, here's less?
We love you, here's less, said Vaizey.
Well, as I said in my opening statement, I'm not sure I would agree with those figures. We significantly increased the amount of lottery funding going to the arts and indeed the amount of lottery funding going to heritage, which is an aspect of cultural policy I hope we're not going to forget during this debate. And again, in terms of having to cut the grant and aid that we gave to the Arts Council, we thought very carefully about the most effective way of doing that. And one of the things we did was to ring-fence as far as we could what are known as the national portfolio organisations, the organisations like the Royal Opera House and the arts organisations that get funded by the Arts Council. So that cut was actually significantly less than the headline figure. It meant we had to lose programmes that may have had strong support, like creative partnerships. It meant we couldn't fund, for example, the Association of Business Sponsorship for the Arts. It meant that some savings were found in the Arts Council's administration costs. But where we had to make cuts, we tried to do so in a way that wouldn't affect what we call, in the terrible bureaucratic speak, the frontline arts organisations. And I think if you look around, if you look at the health of the arts in this country at the moment, you can see that I don't think that the arts funding cuts the headline, the thing that dominates all debate about the arts, rather than the kind of innovative ideas and thinking that I think should dominate debate about the arts. I don't think you've seen the kind of impact that the headline figures would lead you to believe they would have had.
And what's the Labour position on this, Harriet? Because as I understand it, you're actually having the same kind of spending programme as the government you've agreed to, so you wouldn't be in a position to reverse any of these cuts or promise any more money.
We're not actually having the same spending programme. We've said that what they're doing, which their plans would be to have the same amount of cuts over the next 2 years as they've had over the last 5 years, is we're characterising those as extreme spending cuts, which would be very bad. So we have said that we do want to get the deficit down, but we want to do it in a more measured and fair way. And I think that, you know, we showed when we were in government our commitment to public subsidy and public investment in the arts. And I think that the fact that the signs haven't shown of the big cutbacks that Sam has mentioned yet, it's because it's a long-term issue. It's about education, it's about community work in all the different local communities. So I think you do have to invest for the longer term, and we would not do the extreme spending cuts that they're doing, but we also would make sure that for every child they would have the opportunity of an entitlement to a creative education, and that would be inspected by Ofsted, because what we don't want is the growing divide that there is.
Sure.
So I
this
think
is something we're coming on to. But Peter Whittle, from what your earlier remarks, you seem to be suggesting that actually there's an opportunity here that as government funding goes down, the private sector can move in.
Well, yes, I think it's obviously the case that, you know, the arts are going to take cuts along with, unfortunately, you know, other parts of our society. But I think that there is a sort of opportunity, because it's one of those odd paradoxes that, you know, we have cuts being made, but at the same time we have a huge amount of personal wealth. And I think that that is a sort of untapped strength at the moment. So I think that that is, when I say that, people who would give personally, you know, philanthropy. And I think that this is incredibly important, but it will take a long time to develop, as I said earlier. But unfortunately, I think that the fact is, obviously, the arts are going to have to take some cuts along with everything else if we're going to get the deficit down.
Well, let's bring in our next question now, because I think it's on the same topic, and this is from Deborah Bull, who I'm sure you'll know very well, who's Director of Cultural Partnerships at King's College here in London.
Thank you. It's 50 years since Jenny Lee published the only government white paper on the arts that the UK has ever had, and that white paper continues to form the basis of arts policy today. The Warwick Commission's recent findings, which I'm sure you saw, they're eerily similar to some of the challenges that the white paper was trying to address: regional imbalance, how to embed art in the school curriculum, how to ensure the best is available not just to a few, but to all. So, does the panel think that this means public funding over 50 years has had no effect? Or does it mean that given the huge social, economic and technological changes over half a century, it's time now for a radical overhaul of cultural policy? And if so, how would you go about that?
Martin, you're nodding vigorously at that.
Yeah, I think we do need a radical rethink, really. I've talked a bit about, in the opening remarks, about how we would embed creative thinking into education. But I think there needs to be a big change in how arts are funded. The Green Party would, first of all, we would increase the size of the cake. So we would put a lot more funding into the Arts Council. We could probably get on to talking about how that might be funded later on. But we would also put a huge amount of money back into local authorities. Where I come from in Liverpool, there's been drastic cutbacks and a devastation in the amount of money that's gone into arts, but also other things, libraries closing and all sorts of things like that, which has been devastating for people up there. So we would put a lot more resources back into local authorities to restore public services and try and reflate local economies in that way, and arts would be a big part of that.
So Jane Bonham-Carter, what's your view on this? Because the Liberal Democrats went into coalition with the Conservatives with the aim of reducing the deficit. So more money for local government is a tricky area.
I was going to mention that, and also I'm so pleased. I was on the National Campaign for the Arts and it disappeared, and I'm so pleased that, Sam, you have resurrected it, because it's a very important part of the ecology. Now, of course, part of the arts thriving is that people have the money to appreciate the arts, and actually getting the economy back on track is obviously very much part of that. I have another slight angle to this question, Deborah and Sam, which is that I'm a trustee of the Lowry in Salford, and that is somewhere that gets obviously gets some art council funding, but also provides quite a lot of its own funding, and it has been the most tremendous success. It has regenerated an area, which is something I feel so incredibly strongly about the message we should get out about the arts and about culture, which is that without the Lowry, I don't think there would have been Media City. And without Media City, I think there's something I'm not allowed to announce, so I won't announce it. But anyway, what is being done there...
Tease!
What has happened there...
What are you a government minister? Are you announcing
Not yet, Sam. Sorry, not Sam.
This is a new policy.
No. All I'm saying is that, what the Lowry has done in the area of regeneration, helping young people, helping communities become part of Salford is absolutely incredible. And that is down to creativity and culture and the arts. And there is a mixed financial circumstance. So I'm just saying, it doesn't all have to come from government funds. And the fact is, and it's difficult for everyone, but we are in difficult times, and there isn't a lot of money around. So that's...
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure lots of people in the audience have experience of this. So, particularly on this point of funding, the balance between public and private, are there any points or questions that anybody would like to make?
Can I add a point about the public and private? I think, and this is to pick up your point, yeah. I don't think that there is any way you can just assume that your strategy for finance for culture and the arts and the creative industries can come from an increasing reliance on private donations when you have a situation where there is such an imbalance between private donations in London and outside of London. That would leave outside of London, for all the efforts that have been made and for all there are some, good you know, donors outside of London, actually there is a massive imbalance. 70% of the private donations come to London and only 30% elsewhere. And the truth is, if you want actually to have a proper strategy, which could be taken through, you can't just leave it to the market and to the, you know, the largesse of private donors.
So,
Can I come back to that?
Yes, but I'm keen to get a point from the audience as well. Okay, Peter Whittle comes in and then we'll go to this lady here. Yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
Yep.
I think that it's not a question of leaving it to the market, Harriet. I don't believe in the market that can rule everything, certainly not when it comes to the arts. In terms of outside of London, there are some great projects. I mean, for example, you might have heard of Sir Peter Moores, who's from the Littlewoods family, started something called, all with his own money, and the family's money, called Compton Verney. And the point behind that was to create a gallery, it's in the Midlands, simply because he wanted to give kids the chance to see the art that he had and that it might actually interest them. If it didn't interest them, he said, then fine, but he wanted them to have the chance to make the decision. I think that that sort of thing is wonderful, but I would not say for a moment that actually we are reliant, if you like, on private funding, or that's the basis of our strategy. It's just something that is a long-term aim. People who make a lot of money in this country should put something back, I think. And this is something which happens a lot in America, maybe, more than it does here. So that is the sort of culture I would like to develop, but it's certainly not a strategy based purely on that.
Thank you very much. We'll go to the audience now. Perhaps you'd like to tell us where you're from.
I'm Maura Sinclair. I work at the Paul Hamlin Foundation. I think there's an interesting conversation here about arts and culture having a really good evidence base to talk about impact on young people's attainment, on older people's well-being, on dealing with social isolation. But as the panel's already noted, local government funding is really nosediving at the moment, and it's hardly surprising given the other cuts they're trying to manage in terms of adult social care or youth services. Those cuts also have an impact on our sector, on arts and cultural industries, and I'm interested to know how the panel would help smaller arts and cultural organisations, particularly local organisations, compete for contracts in those broader areas of social well-being against national, often non-cultural organisations who seem to me to be getting the lion's share of that kind of money that's available for all of those things that I've just talked about, youth services, benefits to older people, all the things that we know in this House, really, arts and culture can deliver more effectively.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that. Ed Vaizey.
Well, I think it's a very good point, and I think one of the things the next government should do is work with organisations like the Paul Hamlin Foundation. I think over the last 5 years we haven't worked closely enough with some of the really big foundations that make a huge impact, not just on the arts, but on have a much wider social impact using the arts as a tool, and also dozens, hundreds of arts charities that work across the piece. And I am very keen indeed to work much more closely with other government departments. Any of you who have come to see me speak, and I know I'm sure there are lots of you that follow me as I tour the country, I often say that, you know, it is a miracle getting two government departments to work closely together. That's why I regard what we did with music education as a great achievement, because working so closely with the Department for Education has really reaped dividends. But we haven't worked as effectively with the Department of Health. I'd love to see us work much better with the Department of Health and also across all the other issues that Maura talked about. So I think it's a very, very effective point.
Thank you very much indeed, and let you know that, in fact, we're the top trending topic at the moment on Twitter, so keep the remarks going.
I've never done that before.
Yeah, no, it wasn't Ed Vaizey, it was hashtag culture debate.
Even by proxy.
We're going to move on to another subject now, though I'm sure all these issues are very much interrelated. And I'd like to talk to Seth Spain, please, who's 18 and a first-time voter. So interesting election for you, Seth. Off you go.
I'm fortunate enough to be from a family that believes the arts are a fundamental part of life. However, the majority of my friends' experiences are through school and are therefore very limited. How will you ensure that schools value and teach the arts, as well as promoting the creative industries as viable career choices, so that other young people can have the same opportunities I've been fortunate enough to have?
Harriet Harman.
Well, I think that this is absolutely fundamental for each individual, but also for our economy. And I absolutely reject the idea that somehow you have to choose a science path and a technical path, or you choose a creative and artistic path. And I, hear very much those people who say that many of the jobs that people are going to be going into in the future, we don't even know what they are. You have to have a creative and open mind. And also those people who work in science who actually believe about creativity being incredibly important for science. So I think that we have to absolutely embed creativity in education, and that is for every child in every school, not just goodwill and it depending on a particularly committed art teacher or particularly committed head who's also a musician. It's got to be for every child, and that's why we've said that we're going to be saying in our manifesto that there has got to be this universal entitlement to every child to have a creative education that will be actually inspected by Ofsted, that you will not be able to be regarded as an outstanding school if you do not have an outstanding cultural and creative offer. And of course, why would you? It doesn't make any sense. Same with a good school. And also that every school should have a champion of the arts and culture. There's such fragmentation now amongst schools. Sorry.
Yes, no, I was just going to just going to say that it does feed into very much the whole debate around STEM subjects, of course, science, technology, engineering and maths. And your colleague in government, Ed Vaizey, Nicky Morgan, the Education Secretary, said a decade ago people chose arts and humanities because they were useful for all sorts of jobs, but we now know that couldn't be further from the truth. The subjects that keep young people's options open are the STEM subjects. Do you agree with her?
Well, I think the quote is taken out of context, and
that old trick.
This is the third time today I've responded to Nicky Morgan's brilliant speech on science and technology. And the point is that people seem to think this is somehow a binary debate, that if you talk about the need for more people to study science and technology in schools, which is a very urgent need for this country, somehow you are denigrating the arts. And when I read that speech, what I read her as saying is that too often people have said, if you want to give yourself the widest range of career choices, don't touch the sciences, go for the arts. And she was simply redressing that balance and saying, study the sciences and you won't unnaturally restrict your career choices at the end. And I think that's a perfectly valid point to make. And there's no question of the arts being denigrated in our schools.
Have they been squeezed out of the curriculum?
They remain part of the national curriculum. They remain part of the entitlements at GCSE on which schools are judged. It would be beyond comprehension for any school to be judged as outstanding if it doesn't offer a broad and balanced curriculum, and that includes cultural education. And in order to address the gentleman's point in terms of asking the question, not only did we ring-fence the money for music education, but we've also looked at culture education. Both reports were written for us by Darren Henley, who is now the Chief Executive of the Arts Council. So you've got somebody at the centre of the Arts Council who is passionate about this subject. It includes, for example, the work and funding support for Interfilm, which is a national film charity. It includes for the first time heritage education in schools to put kids in touch with their local heritage. So it includes a whole range of different initiatives that we're pushing forward to give people at school a real chance of real cultural experiences.
OK, well, is there anybody in the audience who'd like to make a point on this particular? Yes, thank you very much. Gentleman back, this is about teaching art and creative industries in school.
Yes, my name is Richard Clark from the Mighty Creatives. It was really just a comment on the fact that whilst our education policy is often the envy of the world when it comes to our focusing on cultural education through schools, we're often overly dependent on an emphasis upon schools. And I'd just like to ask the panel to consider that a young life spans the 18 years from birth to adulthood. What is it that we're going to be able to do to make sure that every young life is rich in culture from birth to adulthood, in and beyond school?
Martin.
Well, one of the things the Green Party has got in its manifesto is some youth centres, youth cultural centres. So it's a place that young people can go outside the school curriculum to experience and develop their artistic skills. But I just want to come back to the central point because, and in a way I was talking about that at the beginning, was that it's not, I mean, you can learn the skills of music and art and painting and filmmaking and all the rest of the important skills in the creative industries, but it's that creative thinking, way of thinking. We need our young people to be able to think outside the box, and the education system up to now now has been too much getting people to think inside the box. So it's about embedding a different way of thinking into the whole education curriculum.
An interesting comment about this coming on Twitter from Susan Coles. Jane Bonham-Carter, she says, many arts teachers in primary schools have little or no specialist training or access to subject specialist career professional development. Is that an issue, do you think?
Yes, I mean, I think that there is a problem at the teacher training level as much as at the education level. I have a sister who's an artist. She says children should be allowed to make a mess. And I think that is true, that, you know, we shouldn't corral our children into just doing their times tables and their spelling and so on and so on. And that should go on through the rest of education. And I know Ian Livingstone, who is here, has been a great champion of this fact that arts and science should not be excluded from each other. But can I just also make a point that I think businesses and creative industries are partly responsible for this. They should go into schools, actually, and explain that if you do certain subjects, you can come out and go into a wonderful career. And I think businesses and the creative industry businesses should take more responsibility for explaining to school children and what the potential is if they are to follow certain routes, and just, you know, just be a bit proactive.
Well, that moves us on very nicely to our next question from Imogen Morris, who's Director of Young People in the Arts. Imogen, there you are. Hi there.
The way into working in the arts industry is currently very reliant on internships, low-paid jobs and traineeships, and they're often only available to those with the financial support of friends and family. So how would you encourage the next generation of arts professionals, especially those from a wider range of backgrounds, to enter the industry, and how would you support that?
Peter Whittle, what do you make of this? Because I think there is a view, and I've heard young people who've come to the BBC complaining about this, that they're expected to work for free, or it's, you know, friends of friends who get the jobs, and it becomes more and more of a closed shop.
Or they can afford to work for free, yes. I think it's a real problem. I think the main... Chris Bryant, your colleague Chris Bryant, recently got into some hot water when he talked about the pop singer now, what was he called? James Blunt. James Blunt, basically being a posh boy and all the rest of it, working in the arts. And,
Harriet remembers that.
Yeah. I think the thing is, the interesting thing there is that he might have been a bit cack-handed in the way he put it, but I broadly sort of agree with what he said, because generally speaking, it seems to me in the arts, and I was a journalist and in television for a long time, is that there has been a real change in the people now who are coming into it. And basically, the big change is that they're mostly privately educated. And the assumption, I would say, there is that therefore they can maybe afford to take internships and what have you. And so that therefore there is a growing gap, I think.
What's the policy solution to that, then?
Sorry?
What's the policy solution to that?
Well, I would, for our policy solution is that social mobility generally is ground to a halt. And this is one very, very big part of it. I'm a grammar school boy, and I'm unapologetically so. And one of the reasons I came into UKIP was because we believe in grammar schools, and it's been one of the best ways of creating social mobility in this country. And when they largely started to go is when social mobility started to stop. So that is one policy solution I would put to that.
OK. And Vaizey, on this whole issue, Julie Walters, the actress, has said about drama, I don't know how you get into it now. Kids write to me all the time, and I think, I don't know what to tell you. Working class kids aren't represented.
Well, I don't know the answer to that point, because at the moment the whole debate is anecdotal. So it just so happens that Eddie Redmayne and Benedict Cumberbatch are two very prominent artists at the moment who happen to go to very posh schools, I understand. But, you know, for every Eddie Redmayne, there's an Adele who, in my view, you know, didn't start life with huge privilege. So it would be interesting to see some statistics to actually see the backgrounds of people who are going to drama school or fashion college, or art college, and so on. And I think that is something that is worth the next government looking at very carefully and looking at what the barriers to access are. In terms of, I think all of us need to name check someone in the audience during this debate. So Dinah Kane from Creative Skills Set, which is an employer-run agency that looks at skills in the creative industries, has done a lot of work in this area. And she has corralled, with Channel 4, 400 organisations in the creative industries to put together a range of apprenticeships and paid internships that I think will really bear dividends over the next few years. So there will be tens of thousands of opportunities for young people to get real, meaningful experience in the creative industries in terms, and be paid for it. And I don't think any organisation, as far as I'm aware, that's funded by the Arts Council should be employing, effectively using people's labour for free. So that has to, all of that has to change. And I think we recognise that as a significant change, that people need meaningful work experience and opportunities, and they need to be paid. And there is a huge issue, particularly as well, with diversity in terms of people from BME backgrounds getting the opportunities that they need in the arts and creative industries. And that's something that we really do need to look at, and something we've been working on for the last couple of years.
Jane Bonham-Carter, apprenticeships are very important in this, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, can I pick up on Ed's point about BAME and disability? And he has been leading on this, and it's been a cross-party roundtable. And I, like Martha, I've worked at the BBC, it is, the problem is as much behind the scenes as on in front of the camera. And I do think alongside the class point, there is the diversity point. And apprenticeships, great. Internships, more worrying, because my experience in television, this was about people who could afford to do things for nothing, basically, expenses. And so inevitably that leads to a certain type of person getting up the ladder in the creative industry. So I just think more consensus here, but we should commend Ed for this roundtable, which has actually produced serious, from across the television channels and BFI, serious strategies. Now, these strategies have to turn into reality. And as someone said the other day, I'm afraid, Martha, they walked through, I don't know if it was World at One, but they walked through a production...
It was a Today programme. You're off the hook.
It was a Today programme, OK.
Completely different programme.
Very, very white. But anyway, the future must be to change that.
Anybody from the audience like to pick up on the point of diversity? Yes, gentleman in the back row there. If you just wait for the microphone to get to you, and if you just tell us where you're from.
Yes, thank you. My name's Rick Hall. I'm the chair of Artswork, which is another of the bridge organisations. It's not just a question of diversity. It's the fact that the whole creative and arts industry, the whole infrastructure, is reducing its range of employment opportunities, or the rewards and the remunerations for young people coming into these industries. It's not just about internships, it's about the widespread use of 0 hours contracts within the creative industries as well. And I'd like to hear from the panel something which is rather more radical in terms of addressing the low-wage economy and the opportunities that the arts have always indulged in for self-exploitation, people being prepared to work for nothing because they want to get their foot in the door.
OK, Harriet Harman.
Well, I think that there's been, for I'm sure, quite a long time, a sense in the creative industries and the arts and the cultural sector that actually there needs to be more inclusion, and that it's not acceptable that so many people are in a situation where they don't get access to appreciate and participate in arts and culture. And there's been this kind of consensus, but actually it's not good enough to have the consensus there and nothing changing. And there needs to be a very concerted positive strategy. The ends have to be, the means have to be willed as well as just wishing the end. And I think we have to move beyond us all agreeing that it's not okay to a really serious strategy about it. I've said about education and at schools, you know, you are not going to get kids from, you know, state schools playing in our top orchestras if they don't actually all have that entitlement. But you will see the kids from private schools, and you'll see kids from other countries where they value music more coming into those orchestras. So school is important. We're going to have a range of after-school clubs, before and after school for all primary schools, and we want arts and culture to be absolutely mainstreamed into that. That's one of our commitments. When it comes to the step into work, publicly funded organisations like the BBC, funded by the licence fee, it has got to be absolutely rigorous about ensuring that opportunities are out there and that you do not have friends of friends and, you know, people coming in at the, you know, because I mean, I always say in relation to the BBC that I see my constituents doing the security at the door, and then the person who comes, who's the runner to take me to the green room on a Sunday, is always called, you know, Jemima or Rufus or something, and is a friend of a friend. And I'm sure they're perfectly great people, but actually, you know, we've all learned, and we've had to learn this in politics as well, is if you want to open it up, you have to be absolutely ruthless and scrupulous about that. And that means all organisations which are publicly funded, like the BBC, or organisations that get money from the Arts Council, have got to have a clear strategy. They've got to be accountable for it. They've got to show the outcome. It can't just be goodwill and good intentions. That is not good enough. I mean, there are some good things going on, but it's just too patchy. And we've got to count the numbers and monitor it and be sure year on year we're extending that opportunity. Otherwise, we're all complicit in that unfairness, and it's just not acceptable.
Well, I'm sure if any of the BBC people are here, I think it would say, I think BBC internship, I mean, not saying there aren't issues there, but BBC internships are open to all, and they're not, you know, work experience at the BBC is very tightly controlled. But I want to make a broader point about this, and perhaps a more optimistic way of looking at it. There was, when I started work as a journalist, there were actually very few places that you could work in the creative industry. Now, with the opening up of digital media, it's actually, with citizen journalism, there are many other opportunities. There are different ways of gaining experiences, aren't there?
I think that it's very true, and with the digital media, it's an opportunity for people to learn some of the skills and to have an audience without actually very much outlay and without many skills. But it's not paid jobs, that's the thing. And to get a paid job, and I think that's why one of the reasons why the Green Party, I think, thinks we should have a much bigger public sector, and the cutbacks that have taken place over the last 5 years we see as being unnecessary with the sixth most wealthy country in the world, and there's food banks and there's cutbacks and there's zero-hours contracts, and it's shameful that that's taken place and it's happened. We could have had a redistribution of wealth within the country over the last 5 years, which would have enabled some of the things that Harriet was talking about just there to take place, so that the public sector would be big enough to be able to make a big difference to the lives of the people that you were talking about up there, Rich, very much so. So the new media, the digital sector, is a great opportunity, and it's a great way of reaching an audience, and a lot of people, and a lot of young people, are using it to find new ways of expressing, but it's not the answer for paid jobs at all.
Okay. Well, one tweet, which is maybe lobbing a grenade into all of this. I'm all for cross-party agreement, but this debate is dangerously lacking in disagreement so far. So there you go. There's a challenge for you all. Let's go to our next questioner, Ian Austin, who's the founder of the Games... Oh, sorry, Ian Livingston, who's founder of the Games Workshop.
By bringing the arts and sciences together, video games typify the business of digital creativity, and the UK happens to be pretty good at making games. Grand Theft Auto 5, for example, developed in Scotland, generated $1 billion in revenue in 3 days, and Candy Crush Saga, publishers King.com are located in London. After 30 years of apathy, much has been done by government in recent years to support the industry with the introduction of video games tax relief and computing in schools to encourage digital creativity. Games go beyond entertainment, but do you believe video games belong in the same cultural camp as film, TV, radio, theatre and opera? And if so, how will you personally help take this great British industry to the next level?
Really interesting question. Before we get into the meaty part of your question, just want a quick fire round with all the panellists and just ask you, what was the last computer game you played?
I'm afraid it's a bit of an unknown world to me. I haven't ever played a computer game.
Harriet?
Sorry.
Martin?
I use little games on my phone a little bit, but my son has given you lots of money over the years, all his pocket money, I'm afraid.
Jane?
So embarrassing.
OK, we'll take that
as a Candy Crush. It's called Taco Man.
I think... Ed?
Well, you can guess the age of my children if I say Minecraft, Terraria and FIFA 15.
OK, well, at least establishing the credentials here. But on the more substantial point, what are you doing to support the games industry? And do you regard it as in the same
I thought your question was going to be on a scale of 1 to 10. How boring is this debate? Because we're all agreeing with each other. What are we going to have a row about? Jeremy Clarkson on Have I Got News for You? I mean, you know, we've got to have a row about something. We've done a lot to support the video games industry, as you know. So we introduced the long-awaited video games tax credit, which has made a big difference to the industry. We also support development of video games. We have what's called a prototype fund. And we have, thanks to the great Ian Livingstone who asked that question, put coding into the curriculum. And just to have a disagreement with myself, because this debate is so boring, when Ian brought me his report and one of his recommendations was computer coding should be in the national curriculum, I said, you're off your rocker, you'll never get that through the Department of Education. So he should probably be sitting there and here, and I should have asked the question. So it's all down to him that computer coding is part of the national curriculum. So we need to do more, and yes, I do think games should be seen as part of our cultural landscape. The territory between film and games is becoming ever closer. I want the British Film Institute to do more to support the games industry. It's appointed a couple of people from the games world onto its board, and if and when we have the kind of funding that we would all dream about, I would hope it would support the UK games industry in a similar way to the way it supports the UK film industry, which I think is very important.
Peter Whittle, do you think it's the role of government to support computer gaming?
I think it's the role of government to support small businesses, and a huge number of in the creative industry are small business or would come under small businesses. They're the backbone of the economy. But I think that in answer to what your original questions up there, that I think there is a big difference basically between the gaming industry and, say, for example, opera or theatre, ballet, which you mentioned at the same time. Those things will always, by their very nature, need support. You know, they'll always need funding. So I think that there is a distinction there.
May not be too much disagreement here in the room, but you've caused a bit of a storm on Twitter.
Yes, thank God.
With your claim that the question of class in the arts is purely anecdotal. People are challenging.
No, I'm not saying... I'm saying that at the moment that is the level at which this debate is. That there are no hard statistics that I've seen that show clearly... I'm not saying it's not an issue, but show clearly what the issue is. So I think that is... It is important...
did not come from Eton.
Exactly.
So now we know something else you do in your time,
exactly.
as well as playing computer
Where
games.
did he come from?
Ireland.
we could go into all sorts of...
Harriet's also watching as well, so that's interesting. but just return
But
to
the point I'm saying is I've acknowledged, I think the next government should do some... should look hard at this issue. But I think the debate now needs to go forward on the basis of some hard statistics. And at the moment, all we have is whether Poldark or Benedict Cumberbatch are posh or not.
Can I interject here? I actually think what this shows is having a really good teacher. And it goes back to a question, I think, that was asked earlier.
First applause of the evening there. Pause.
That's gone.
Go on, do it again, do it again.
No, because there was clearly an inspirational teacher at Eton who produced a lot of these actors. And I think we go back to something someone asked earlier on about teachers. and whether they were properly trained in teaching the arts. And I think I said at the time, and I believe that we teach at teacher training level, this has to be addressed.
Do you think people did well from Eton because they had an inspirational teacher?
No, I said I thought that an inspirational... No, I didn't say that.
That's why I asked.
No, I said I thought an inspirational teacher, a teacher who was inspirational in the area of drama, got a load of very...
From Eton, there's clearly something else at play, I think.
Yeah. Well, no. Of course, I was saying of people who were at Eton, but what they were directed into, rather than into being lawyers and politicians and...
But that's why it's not anecdotal, because they all came from Eton. I don't think that it's just like Benedict Cumberbatch has tumbled in. It's because there's a structural thing at play that means that people can succeed from certain areas and going to certain schools.
Yes, no, I agree. But all I was saying, I was making a wider point, which is that the teacher is a very important element. And if you go back, 20 years, the inspiration, the Etonians coming through were not all being hugely successful actors.
Ed Vaizey, perhaps you'd like to address this point, because it's a direct challenge to what Ed Vaizey was saying.
No, it's not. What I said was that at the moment, the analysis is based on anecdote, and what we need is hard evidence, and I've said that the next government should collect that evidence so we know what the barriers are that are holding people back and what the scale and aspect of the problem is. But we can't also... There's something about this debate as well where there's a kind of tone about things have all started going wrong and it was all perfect 50 years ago. There were Etonians acting 50 years ago and there were Etonians acting 100 years ago as well.
OK, let's take two more points from the audience and we'll come back to you, Peter. Yes, yes. You and then the lady behind.
To touch on the idea of the privately educated being dominating the arts. I went to an East Midlands state school and graduated 2 years ago with a degree in fine art from Camberwell College of Arts. I'd like to say it is nearby impossible for an individual artist or creative practitioner living in London, I'm going to say London because that's where I'm living, but elsewhere in the UK, to live and work in this society with the cost of living so unreasonably high and the rent. And that is why it is a career for the privileged few and not
And the woman sitting behind. Yeah. Sorry, no, it's the woman that just there, yeah.
Hello. Yes, I graduated over 20 years ago in fine art. Found it very difficult to make a living as an artist, so I trained as a primary school teacher, which I loved. But to be honest, I've seen over the last 18 years in primary education the life being drawn from it in regard of creativity given to the teachers, that they're not allowed anymore to be creative. The SATS obsession has become insane, and that has led me to have to leave full-time teaching now, and I'm looking for more creative ways to use my skills. It's crazy what's going on with the obsession with SATs, and as far as I'm concerned, that's where it stops. What can you say? Sorry, Ed. Sorry. About the... In the news this morning, David Cameron was talking about retesting children in Year 7 if they fail their SATs at Year 6. Now, I have not heard the word fail used within primary education for quite a long time, and it's insidious the way it's crept in this election. I'm absolutely ashamed of what's going on.
Ed Vaizey.
Well, I mean, your time frame was the last 20 years, and I don't really know where to begin. I mean, I believe that it's right to test children. I think most parents do believe it's right to be able to assess how well their kids are doing at school. No time for art. I don't agree with that. I just don't agree with that in the terms.
I'm doing it, Ed.
Well, I'm in schools all the time as an MP. I see what goes on in schools. I don't believe for a minute that there's no time for art. I can go to every primary school in my constituency and see a huge displays of art and lots of arts going on in those schools. So I don't believe it. But this is what, again, again and again, this debate is coming down to people's personal perspective and anecdotes. And it's not based on hard evidence. So people
That's
are saying,
hard evidence.
you know, we can trade Adele, we can trade Tracy Emin, we can trade all sorts of names. It's not going to get us anywhere unless we have the hard evidence
Harriet
that what you assert is going
Harriet
on.
Harman and then Peter
If you
Whittle.
look in primary schools from the Taking Part survey 2010 to 2014, dance down by 11%, music down by 13%, theatre studies down by 11%, arts and craft down by 4%. And I think the truth is that we have to completely have a change of direction and change of message. And you know, Nicky Morgan, in that speech that was quoted there, she did actually go on to say, don't choose arts because it could hold you back for life.
She did not say that.
She did. She absolutely did.
She said, do not turn away from the sciences if you think that the sciences are going to hold you back in life. And the fact is that more young people are participating in the arts than ever before. No. And I'm sorry to refer to tests, which seem to be unpopular with a part of this audience, but more young people are taking music qualifications and are taking arts qualifications than ever before. There are about 150,000 young people studying for arts GCSEs at the moment. So it's just simply not true to say that there's been this kind of falling off a cliff in terms of arts education.
Peter Whittle.
I think the broader point, I mean, you wanted some dissent or to throw a bomb into the argument or whatever. I think we should have grammar schools again. I think probably, I'd like to know what all the panel think, but I imagine none of them do. So I'm trying to open up a bit of a crevice in the debate here. The general point about social mobility is undeniable. I mean, I agree with what Ed is saying about, you know, posh actors and then Tracy Emin and all the rest of it. You can be very anecdotal about it, but it sort of has stopped. I mean, the amount of people who went to Oxford and Cambridge in the 70s was from state schools was about 60, it was about 40% private. That has now turned around. And that is undeniable. That is a fact. It's not an anecdote. And that, therefore, has an impact on the arts, on journalism, on the media, and indeed all other parts, actually, of the establishment, if you like. So, for me, grammar schools are one of the great ways out for kids who want to get into good positions, want to be in these areas, and it's about selection, and I'm sure that I don't know, would anyone agree?
I think we get the gist of your argument, but before we go range too broadly, I know education is very important in this field. I would like just to get Jane Bonham-Carter to respond to the point maybe the young woman here. She was just saying the cost of living is too high. You can't work or practice in the arts if you live in London.
Well, I mean, that is a big problem, obviously, and that's... Again, can I return to my sister, who was an artist in a time, she's now old enough to be living with her partner somewhere. But when she was your age, there was a... No, listen to me. There were the successful corporations, in this case I think I'm right, it was, I can't remember who, BT may have been, who had spaces which they weren't using, handed them over to artists for low rents to use as cooperatives, and not somewhere for them to live, but somewhere for them to work. And I think that is something that should be encouraged among all the businesses that have spare property in London in particular, that are not being used, to loan their space out at rents that artists can afford for them to do their work in. The living thing is beyond.
Would that be Lib Dem policy?
Well, it's a Jane policy.
OK, all right. Let's move on to our next questioner now, and Hassan Bakshi, who's Director of Creative Economy and Policy and Research at Nesta. And yeah.
Thank you. So our research shows that if you look at employment in the UK's creative economy, 43% of jobs are found in London and the southeast of England alone. So in government, what would you do to help grow creative businesses that are outside London and southeast in the UK as a whole?
Martin, I want to start with you, as you talked about your experience in Liverpool, so it must be a subject close to your heart.
I've applied for money from Nesta and in Liverpool one time. So that was, I was trying to create some jobs there in Liverpool from funding from Nesta. So that's great to see you here.
Did they give you money?
I'm afraid not, no, actually. But we would try.
You may have a better chance now.
Yeah, it's a real problem, and there's a lot of creative talent in other parts of the country. I mean, Liverpool's a great example. Virtually everybody in Liverpool's in some part of a creative industry. When I first moved there, virtually everybody I met was a musician, and there's also lots of people who are actors. And it was a great place for the computer games industry until fairly recently when Sony moved out. But it's still got a lot of talent, a lot of small businesses doing that there. I have to keep going back to the same thing, that we need a bigger public sector and more public funds, because that is how you direct resources. If you leave it to the private sector, you'll get it concentrations into things like London and South East, and into ways of working which support the privileged and the moneyed few, and leave the people at the bottom without the opportunities. So we need to have a radical rethink about the whole economy, so that there is more fairness, less disparity between rich and poor, and that's how you can start directing funds towards the things that are better for the whole society, for the common good, rather than for the privileged few.
Harriet, Harman.
Well, I think one thing that is very important is to support local councils in their support for creativity, arts and culture in their local area. One of the things that is, I think, insufficiently recognised, that actually most of the funding, the government funding that goes into the arts and culture and creativity, comes from local councils, not central government, and that's why the cuts have been so keenly felt. But I think that they have
Is Labour promising to give more money to local government than the Conservatives?
No, not...
You've just voted to have, or Ed Balls has just said you're going to have a £500 million cuts in local authorities after the election. I'm saying that basically, I was just going to say that I think that actually the role of local councils is important, not only in actually the money that they give, but also in the way that they can support by their planning decisions, by their decisions in all sorts of ways that they interact with local communities to support arts and culture. And there ought to be support from central government to local councils to actually create a network of the core city leaders who work together, who are very important in those big cities, but also all the councillors who are the lead on creativity, arts and culture in their own area. I mean, the other thing that, just to pick up a point about gaming industries and tax relief, is that we back and initiated tax relief to support creativity and to support investment. But actually, it's important for those that are benefiting from that respond by creating apprenticeships and paid internships.
I think if we're having public money foregone, so actually it needs to go all the way through.
This is ground we've gone over, but on this very important point about how you make sure that arts funding is spread more equitably around the country, interesting statistic we're looking at saying that Londoners benefited from £69 of spending per head, compared with just £4.50 in the rest of England. Do you think this is a problem?
Well, again, that is a very misleading statistic, and I'd like to. I mean, it's interesting again how people, they talk about funding cuts and they give you the impression that sort of tumbleweed is going through the streets of the particular city they're talking about. I go to Liverpool a lot. It was the European capital of culture, and it really capitalised on that. It opened technically the first national museum that's opened in 100 years, the Museum of Liverpool. The Liverpool Everyman's just been refurbished, is now the pride of the city. Liverpool Central Library has just been refurbished, and Liverpool is a city that's put
it's costing
culture,
£5 million a year. The PFI contract is that library.
It wasn't my PFI contract.
It means
but Liverpool has put culture at the heart of this
city.
You are here representing this city, telling this audience that it's sort of its culture is dead. It's never been more vibrant because the city council has got behind
it, funding is
and it's
focused on
passionate about its cultural organisations, and yet you would tell us that Liverpool is dead. And there's a similar story in Manchester, where the Chancellor's just given £78 million to create the factory, but again, the thriving art scene in Manchester. And when you talk about that £69 per head in London, That's money that's going to organisations that have a London address but aren't necessarily doing the arts in London. Yes, a lot of that money, say, for example, goes to our national museums, but then you've got the Imperial War Museum in Salford, in Manchester, and then you've got Tate in Liverpool, and you've got all our national museums with presence around the UK. You've got, I went to see All My Sons, the Tilawa Theatre Company in Richmond in London, but the reason I knew they were there was because I bumped into them when I went up to Ipswich. They've got a London address, but they're a touring theatre company. And most of what arts organisations based in London do, they do a hell of a lot outside of London, the Royal Opera House being a very good example of that, where we're having this debate. So that's a completely and utterly misleading statistic. We do need to, I think, work more closely with local authorities. We need to really support some of our most preeminent institutions outside of London, to treat them effectively as quasi-national institutions that deserve a partnership between local government and central government. That's very important. But we don't need to hear kind of weasel words from Harriet about how difficult it is for local authorities when Labour are not promising more money for local authorities. And when Newcastle, a Labour council, cut its arts budget, Harriet supported them all the way.
And Martin, you've said how much you want to expand the public sector, but isn't the case that actually that, you know, private investment in the arts is pretty healthy, isn't it? You know, 22%, business investment has gone up on the previous year. Isn't it possible for there to be a substantial role for private investment in the arts?
There certainly is a...
I've got it here, up 0.2 million on the previous year, and the figures we have, and the figures I've been given here, we can argue.
Where's that figure from, please?
It's arts and business.
They don't exist anymore.
They do exist. They do exist.
Okay. Right,
They're
I'm sorry.
a real thing. Like
We
the
spoke
National
to them this
Campaign for the
morning,
Arts.
Okay,
actually.
my
We spoke to them
apologies.
this
Yes, they're on the
morning.
end of a phone, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did speak to them this morning, so we can take some of this
They're
online.
not funded by the Arts Council anymore, that is true.
I was going to say that there is a role for private sponsorship of arts, and certainly I'm not going to deny that. But I think that to get the major parts of, you know, the theatres and the galleries and the concert halls, it needs to be public funding. I think there's been a problem. I mean, Ed's mentioned the library, Central Library in Liverpool, which is fabulous. But it was a PFI contract, and it saddled the council with this £5 billion a year debt it has to pay, and it means they're having to close all the local libraries. So we're going to end up with just one library in the whole city. And it's just, you know, the centre of the city is doing very well for arts, but go a mile outside, and it's some of the worst deprivation in the whole country. It's just, it's the country in a microcosm.
Can I just add to that? Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think there is a general London centricism at the moment. I mean, if it doesn't happen here, it sort of isn't happening, you know, and I say that as a Londoner. I think that the point there about public funding, you know, outside of London is very important. But we've got to be careful not to just sort of, as it were, parachute things in, because, you know, there have been some schemes, you know, if I'm thinking of the Public in West Bromwich, for example, which is a terrible failure, and it cost, I think in total it was 60 million, 30 million of it was public money. Then there was the Centre for Pop Music, again outside London, which again sort of had to close. I mean, you know, they just didn't work. There's got to be some consultation with people locally.
Okay.
And, you know, in UKIP, for example, we are committed to holding local referenda on all big planning issues such as that.
Okay, well, let's just, before we move on, just a quick audience reaction to this. I know we're based in London, but who here believes that there is a north-south divide in the arts? And who doesn't? And creative industries, okay. Well,
That's the wrong question, somebody was saying.
Yes, okay, much broader issue. Deborah will say so.
In London, there is areas of lack of access. You know, you can be in Camberwell School of Arts, but the kids from the local schools don't get to apply. I mean, the council have now got a bursary scheme to try and address that, and are working with. But you have to look within London as well about the cultural divide.
I want to get to another couple of questions before we come to a close. So, first of all, Amit Sharma. Where is Amit? There you are. Thanks very much.
2 in 5 disabled children are living in poverty. The Independent Living Fund is now closed, and the Access to Work scheme is not providing equality in the workplace by cutting support by up to 60%. Disabled people aren't being given the support to work, and they can't afford not to work. My question is, when a young deaf or disabled person tells me they want a career in the arts and asks, what support is out there for me, what do I tell them?
Jane Bonham-Carter, what should Amit tell them?
I would return to what I said earlier, which is the cross-party roundtable that has been set up, which is addressing this issue, and ITV, Channel 4, BBC, BFI, Sky have all brought forward papers, and indeed I think skill set under Diana Kane to address this issue, and it will be addressed.
Can I just come back on that? Because something like the Independent Living Fund, which is now closed, 18,000 people who were using that to live as independent people within their communities. Because the fund is now closed, they've got two options. They've got an option of still staying in their houses but not having 24-hour care, or they've got the option of returning to residential homes, which actually costs more per person to go back in. So if we're not giving them the opportunity to be equal members of our society and also be equal members of this cultural debate that we're having, so they're in that position right there. Then we're saying with an Access to Work scheme, which is actually for disabled people to work, actually there's certain parameters that you have to meet within the Access to Work scheme to work. By one hand, we're saying the living standards are cut. By the other hand, we're saying for you to work, we're being cut. So what are we supposed to do?
Let's get an answer to that from Ed Vaizey.
Well, I don't think the Access to Work Fund has been cut. My understanding is actually more money has gone into the Access to Work Fund, and it's funding more people, giving them the opportunity to work. So I think that is an unequivocally good thing, and I know that the Arts Council is a very, very strong supporter of the arts for disabled people performing in the arts. It supports a number of different arts organisations, and it published its strategy at the end of last year. It's also published advice on it's also incredibly important to make arts venues accessible, because we're not just talking about performers, we're talking about the audience as well, and all those things are very, very high priorities for me and very high priorities for the Arts Council. So we need to continue to work together to make the kind of impact that needs to be made to give as many people as possible the opportunities either to work in the arts or to be performers, or to actually go and see performances, or go and visit arts organisations. But William Hague, when he retired from Parliament, said one of his greatest achievement after his 30 years in Parliament was the Disability Discrimination Act, and it is important that we see through the principles of that Act.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. And we're going to go to Chris Hurst now, who's CEO of Havas Media. Chris, whereabouts are you?
I'm here.
Hello.
Hi there.
So I'm the European CEO of a big advertising agency, that's what Havas is. And advertising continues to be part of our industry in general that is preeminent, globally preeminent. We deliver global solutions for global brands. But to do that, increasingly, we need the best global talent in London and the UK more broadly. Given the amount of debate in this election so far about how we stop people coming into the UK, what would the panel do in order to maintain and preferably improve London and the UK as a destination of choice for the world's best creative talent?
Harriet Harman.
Okay, well, I think not drifting out of the European Union would be a good start on that. I think making sure that that all our consulates and all our embassies know that they are part of the creative and artistic and cultural activity that is this country, and therefore them making sure that their visa outposts sort stuff out when problems happen. And I think that actually we talk a lot rightly about the link up between the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, which incidentally we pledging to keep, and BIS and the education, but also FCO supporting things like Erasmus, I think is very important indeed. And also we are going to be having more investment in the UK border agency to make sure that, you know, we can have smarter and quicker immigration systems. I mean, you know, I hear, I'm sure as you do, there are many organisations that think performances are arranged and somebody gets stuck and they don't seem to be able to unstick the visa problem in China and, you know, things. And so I think, you know, just trying to keep everybody out is not the way to be, you know, being a global player in the arts and culture, which is what we need to be.
Peter, but what about Harriet Harman's first point that if we left the European Union, there would be damage caused to the arts because we'd become more culturally isolated?
I totally reject that. The point is we actually want to go, we want to go out from Europe. Europe is actually a contracting economy. I think the crucial point about people of high skills, creative people that you want to hire, is if I just explain without being too technical and boring about it, but essentially our immigration proposals are that we would have a point system and that would apply to everybody. So at the moment it's, you know, if you're outside the EU, you have to go through certain sort of channels. If you're within the EU, you just have an automatic right, which is sort of oddly discriminatory, I would say. We want a level playing field, but in that, we would have a migration commission which would control and work this new system, and part of that would be a greater enhancement of highly skilled visas. So in fact, at the moment, I think it's something like 21,000 highly skilled visas issued. We would hugely increase that. We want highly skilled people from all over the world, you know, from Australia, from wherever it might be, from Asia, you know, wherever.
Or Canada or New Zealand.
Or wherever. No, I'm just picking countries outside the European Union. We want a completely international. So
okay.
I would say that you know, your situation would be better actually under our system.
Okay, Ed Vaizey, what do you think? What would the Conservatives do if in power to attract more international talent, or indeed stop people from leaving the country?
Well, we've put an export ban on Neil McGregor, who's announced his retirement from the British Museum as a rare, almost priceless treasure that we don't want to see leaving the country. No, I mean, that's a very good example, actually. We are all, as it were, involved in a sector which relies on international talent. As Neil goes to Germany to advise the German culture minister on a cultural quarter for Berlin. So we have Martin Roth at the V&A presiding over the fantastic, incredible McQueen exhibition at the V&A. And these are industries that attract talent from all over the world. It's global industries, if you like. And advertising is a very good example of that. And the advertising agencies that I talk to are a good example of the success of the UK as a hub for creative talent, because most of the advertising agencies effectively now have their European headquarters here, and they will have Spanish, Italians, French, Germans running country campaigns in those countries, but based in London. And there are a whole host of reasons for that, and some of it is the kind of intangible creativity that exists in this country that you can't necessarily legislate for, and some of it, yes, going back to earlier debates, is about London's particularly unique position at the moment, I think, as probably the world's most successful global city. So I want London and I want the UK to continue to attract international talent, but it is right and proper that we have a debate on Europe, and that there are changes we want to see in our relationship with the European Union, and those are changes that we'll put to the British people in 2017 if you vote Conservative and deliver a majority Conservative government, which I know you as an audience will do almost as one. So, and just to segue very quickly, because I know I'm trying your patience, Martha, back to Deborah Bull's point. I just want to make this before time runs out, because I thought Deborah's question about Jenny Lee's white paper 50 years ago, and we did, in fact, a document in DCMS, which we published on the cover of Darkness at the end of the Parliament, evaluating what we've done over the last 5 years, but very much in homage to Jenny Lee and her incredible work as an arts minister. I do think that there is something about this debate that we've had that perhaps we are still debating, you know, the same things that Jenny Lee debated in quite narrow confines. And when we talk about, you know, the arts in the regions or whatever, there's a lot going on that is just happening despite government and despite the major arts institutions. And somebody touched on it earlier about technology, the fact that, you know, there's so much kind of digital media out there and there's so much creativity going on that government's not legislating for, that some of the major institutions. And that's a challenge for government and it's a challenge for all of you.
You know what you said about trying my patience? Yeah. Okay. Final word from Harriet.
I thought you were cheering me on, sorry.
Well, I guess my final word is that, you know, arts and culture and creativity is actually spurred along by the artists and the creators and the people in the cultural sector, but actually it deserves public policy support. And you don't get the best out of it without you get access for everybody, and that must mean education for every child everywhere. You don't get the best out of it if you shrink away from the public sector and be afraid of the BBC because it's not private, and be afraid of the word subsidy, and you think that private investment is good and public investment is bad. And you don't get it unless you can actually understand abroad, and that includes Europe and it includes the rest of the world. So I think that, you know, we all here are all committed to it, to arts, culture and creativity, but I think that, you know, the evidence is that there is a role for government nationally and locally, and it must embrace that and back up our creators and our artists.
Okay. And now this is my very last question. I want very short answers from you all, but I think it'll give us a sense of what kind of people you are. And my last question is, what's the last creative thing you did? Peter Whittle.
You mean that I didn't just consume? I mean...
Well, you know... It
could be I consumed... Well, actually, I can tell you very specifically, before I came here, I went to the gym, and I was on that cross-trainer thing, and there, you know, they have these televisions that are silent, and it was Keeping Up with the Kardashians, so I watched that, and it was grim. It was very grim.
Okay, well,
but that was called for, I guess.
I think we're stretching the definition of creative there, but fair enough. Don't want to be a snob, don't want to be a snob. Harriet, what was the last creative thing that you did?
Well, I'm not, you know, personally gifted or talented. I have to confess this. However, I'm a very passionate supporter, and I hope that the creative things that I'm going to be able to do if we get into government is to make sure that every single child has the opportunity.
Oh,
and you know
come
what?
on,
No,
it's
but
a
I'm sorry,
political point. I thought you might be saying you're joining Ed Balls and having piano lessons.
No, not
all right,
as talented as
all
Ed
right,
Balls.
okay, no more speeches. Martin.
I consumed some art on the Saturday night. I went to see the fabulous production at the Liverpool Everyman Theatre of The Midsummer Night's Dream, which I would heartily recommend to everyone. But I'm a musician as well, and I play the Anglo concertina, and I love playing in Irish sessions, so down the pub with my mates, drinking and playing tunes at the same time. So that's my hobby.
If only we'd known, we could have ended with a talent show, couldn't we? Okay. Jane Bonham-Carter.
I finished Nora Webster, which I recommend to all of you.
Oh, Column to Bean.
And
fantastic
saw Bad
writer.
Jews last night, which I recommend to all of you too. But of course, the most creative thing I've done is take part in this.
Oh, that's so nice.
Very good.
Sorry.
I was going to say that. Well, I'm obviously gearing up for the election campaign, but in between canvassing...
You say your speeches are going to be creative.
In between canvassing and leafleting, I've seen the Royale at the Bush, all my sons at the Richmond Orange Tree Theatre, and as I said earlier, the incredible McQueen, not to mention Inventing Impressionism, and lots of lovely bodies at the British Museum.
Ah, yes, the beauty
sculpted
exhibition.
by famous Greeks.
What could be better? Well, we'll leave you with a couple of remarks from Twitter. Alex Buchner saying, #culture debate is trending here from across the pond. Wish we were having these discussions at this scale in this country. And this is my favourite one from Mike Cluley, who says, this is the weirdest play I've ever seen. Which is fantastic. Anyway, just to say, I hope that you found this debate illuminating and certainly got a great deal livelier than it was at the outset, and set out the various different positions from the political parties. Do continue the discussion online. The hashtag is Culture Debate, or you can watch the debate again if you're very keen on BBC Arts or YouTube. So I'd like to end finally by saying thank you very much indeed to you in the audience and to my panel here, and thank you for joining us at the Royal Opera House here this evening. Thank you.